Hello, welcome to Domino Theory, the podcast about U.S. politics, the media, and business, especially with an eye to Asia and America's role there. I'm Christian Whiton, joined as always by co-host Mark Simon. Today, we'll be joined by guest Ned Ryun. Ned is the founder and CEO of American Majority. We'll talk about the election and discuss his new book, which is titled American Leviathan, The Birth of the Administrative State and Progressive Authoritarianism. Part of Ned's book is about how an empowered president can actually break apart the administrative state that is crushing the freedoms of the American people. So it's very topical given the election and everything that's going on. But first, to lead it. While the election seems to be on a razor's edge, I argue that an electoral college win for Donald Trump is actually coming into view. Yes, polls have the national popular vote have Vice President Kamala Harris ahead, although she is ahead by less than Hillary Clinton was in 2016. But this is an election of the 50 states, and Trump is consolidating his position in swing states. Of the Republican-leaning swing states that Trump must win, Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina, he leads in the Real Clear Politics average of polls. Beyond those, he must win only either Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, or Michigan to win the presidency. Winning 2 or 3 would be great, but he only needs 1. In Pennsylvania, the last 4 major polls have Trump tied or leading by a point or 2. In Wisconsin, the most recent poll had him up a point, although most previous polls had him down a point. A lot can happen in a week in politics, much less the 6 weeks until the election ends. But as early voting begins, victory seems to be within grasp. Also, let's look past the numbers. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably have an interest in policy and hard data and wish that Trump would be a little tighter with his proposals, facts, and targets on the campaign trail. But compare it to Kamala. Trump could be a poli-sci professor with the level of detail and direct campaign messages and plans he has, in contrast to her. With Trump, voters basically know how he will bring back the 3 fat years of economic growth and peace we had before the pandemic. He'll cut energy prices, which will make everything cheaper, and stop the overspending by government that has driven inflation. He'll negotiate, or at least try to negotiate, the end of wars rather than starting new ones. He'll get control of the border and deport some of the bad hombres that have come across. And he will rebuild the military to be what Rush Limbaugh used to identify as its primary purpose, which Rush joked was to kill people and break things, rather than a sandbox for DEI experiments and the 4-star politicians we have who can't win wars. Contrast that to Kamala and her 0-calorie word salad. How will she make life better for anyone except the government bureaucrats and elite overlords about whom our guest, Ned, has written? In short, as he did in 2016, Donald Trump is connecting emotionally with voters and offering them practical solutions. While Kamala Harris is hiding from even the fanboys in the corporate media, Trump is communicating with voters in plain language and, despite the best efforts of big media, big tech, and Hollywood, he's getting through. Some Democrat antics may also be backfiring. The biased debate that ABC News produced actually cost it nearly 1 million viewers in the days after the debate. A large number of foreign policy and intelligence experts have endorsed Kamala, but many of these people propagated the Russia hoax and later lied about Hunter Biden's incriminating computer. Democrats also invited Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky to tour an ammunition factory in the swing state of Pennsylvania at taxpayer expense. That seems like election interference by foreigners, especially since Zelensky criticized Trump and Vance just days after a pro-Ukrainian zealot tried to kill Trump. Did these actions win over voters upset that Biden and Harris policies have destroyed 30% of their savings and purchasing power through inflation? If I am right, and if the trend continues, Trump would get another 4 years of chief executive. Those around him this time promise that he learned much from his tumultuous first term, which included some plainly disloyal and feckless political appointees, on top of the permanent swamp critters that partially undermined his presidency and even got him impeached on a phony premise. Trump will inherit a national debt that is as big as our annual economic output, a stock market bubble and looming recession, the reckoning for which has been delayed by a Federal Reserve desperate to elect Kamala Harris. He will also find a depleted military, which falls well short of recruiting goals, wars in Ukraine and Israel, and a set of bases in the Pacific that are largely naked to Chinese attack. Elected, he'll have just over 4,000 political appointments, about half of which actually matter, to manage a mostly hostile federal workforce of 3 million people. In other words, winning the presidency isn't the end of the fight, it's just the beginning of a struggle like no other. And Trump would only have one term to turn the ship around. It's frankly amazing he's willing to undertake this task at all, if voters let him. All right, that's the lead-in. Now let's welcome Ned Ryun, who has a lengthy career in politics and is the perfect person to discuss not only the presidential election, but the immense job of what must be done to make government accountable to the public. That's the lead-in. Mark, do you have some questions for Ned?
Yeah, absolutely I do. We have some mutual friends, Ned and I, but I'm also been a fan of his work in American Greatness for a while. Ned,
appreciate that.
Got to ask the question that it's a little bit out there, I know, but you know, when we look at the people and we look at the Democratic Party or we look at the left, I'm starting to see more and more a breakdown between, and this is again not kind of out there, what I call the productive people, the productive part of the economy, and the unproductive part of the economy, and the unproductive people. I know it sounds really odd, and I guess that's no business. But my point is like when you look at San Francisco, there's actually been an awareness again by really there's no Republicans in San Francisco, you know what I'm saying? But by basically people who want to get things done, that they've got these trust fund babies, these NGOs. You know, all these people out there that are basically wrecking the place because there's no consequence to them. When you talk about the American Leviathan, who are these people that Donald Trump or whoever comes in, who are these people they have to move out? I mean, is it a range of the people I'm talking about? But because to me, that's the most important thing.
It is. Yeah, so American Leviathan to me, and I describe it in the book, is this massive bureaucracy started over 100 years ago by progressives, which, by the way, the progressive movement was not strictly a Democrat movement. It was Republicans and Democrats, just a very different governing philosophy from a representative democracy, constitutional republic. I'll make many points along the way, but I want to stress this point. What we have today with an administrative state with unelected bureaucrats doing the real governing has nothing to do with representative democracy. But that was the whole point the whole time. They wanted to create a massive bureaucracy, and the only separation of powers they were interested in was separating that administrative state out from any political accountability and then giving those unelected bureaucrats the power to actually govern through their statutes and regulations. So when I talk about the American Leviathan that is confronting Donald Trump, it is underneath the umbrella of the administrative state, but there's the surveillance state, obviously the CIA, NSA, all of these powerful entities of the surveillance state. There's the regulatory state that I think is one of the greatest threats to our economic freedom, but also our national security because of the onerous burden of regulations that have driven some, I think, pretty vital manufacturing offshore. And then there's the retired in place state, the DMV, in which there's about 800,000 federal employees that are considered non-essential. It's almost a patronage system for Democrats in which it's actually kind of a money laundering situation in which they hire those who are loyal to the Democrat Party. They pay them through taxpayer dollars. And shockingly, with a lot of these political donations, 90 to 95% of them go towards one direction, the Democrat Party. So I almost consider it something of a money laundering situation. So I think what's taken place over the last almost 10 years with Donald Trump and permanent DC, this administrative state, really starts with the basic premise of who's actually in charge, who decides. Who decides what the direction is for domestic and foreign policy? And Donald Trump showed up in January of 2017 and said, I'm the duly elected president. I decide. They said, we don't think so. We think we decide. Bolstered by Democrats, establishment Republicans. I don't want to call media the corporate propagandists. And really, all this Russian collusion, Ukrainian quid pro quo, lawfare, all that is about who decides, but it's also a clash of very different worldviews and different competing governing philosophies, constitutional republic versus administrative state. So you ask, what is he dealing with? It is an assortment of powerful entities inside of the administrative state, but it comes down to who decides. And he's of the opinion that we're a constitutional republic, which quite frankly, we haven't operated as such for decades, and that the duly elected representatives of the people are the ones who should be deciding these things. And that elections should have consequences. I mean, this to me, I make the point in the book, elections come and go, administrations come and go, and the state remains. And that's a problem. That's a problem for the American people, because when the state remains and they think they decide they govern, it really doesn't change how government operates and the priorities of government and how the country, the direction the country takes, because they are the ones that are really truly entrenched in power. And they know that. They know that for the most part, they just have to outlast the most current Republican administration, and then they'll just get back to doing business.
That sounds very similar, having lived overseas most of my life. That sounds very similar to every expat station manager, country manager. That is, some guy's gonna blow through there for 4 years. Everybody just sits back. We'll get a new one. We'll get a new one soon. My question:
no accountability.
Yeah, none.
Let me make really a point really quick. The problem with all of that is when you have unelected bureaucrats, and it has been separated out from any accountability because they're unelected. And then on top of that, you've consolidated power, because progressives wanted to consolidate executive, legislative, and judicial into one. Unaccountable, unelected, consolidated power tends to become abusive, authoritarian.
Well, I mean, the one thing that's really struck me about the left lately, and there's a lot too, and I agree with you, there's folks on the right. I mean, I watched the Romney 2012 campaign, and I had the unique position of watching their so-called transition team get ready. And believe me, there was nothing revolutionary going on with those guys. They were going to come in and just basically expand the job base.
Yep.
My question to you is, you are actually very active in voter registration. You're very active in getting people out to vote. That's what I respect. I mean, I like grassroots guys. I mean, that's one thing. Do you think the American people get it? Do you think they understand that, the ones that we need to get it? Of course, the people who promote it, they get it. But I mean, does the American people get it, or is it over the head?
I think they've sensed for a while now that something's very wrong. Something's not quite working. I don't think they've been able to put, their finger on it, but something generally is wrong, because they don't think that this government actually prioritizes them and their interests, and they're starting to think they're an afterthought, but they don't quite know what the problem has been. And again, it goes back to when you have unelected bureaucrats who prioritize themselves and their own interests and use the American people as an ATM to fund their priorities and not the American people, you tend to start finding yourself in a situation like we are today. I think part of the problem has been, and again, the point of the corporate propagandists is not, the whole point of the founders for a free press was to provide transparency so the American people could make better decisions in many ways. And it's not always been that way, even from the beginning, but that was kind of the point. Have a free press that actually communicates to the American people, here's the truth of what's happening. When you're not getting the truth or understanding what's happening, it's very hard for them to hold what is taking place to any accountability or to fully understand what the problem is. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to write the book. I've been in D.C., sadly. Well, I came as a child. Let's put it this way. I came as a child prodigy, right? So 25 years later, I find myself sitting here going, I need to try and do the best that I can to communicate to the American people. Here's the problem. I would argue, I even asked the publisher to move the publishing date up, don't do a hardback, do a paperback, so that it would come out in September of 2024, so that this could be a conversation with the American people, because I believe the central issue, one of them, at least in the 2024 election, is what are you going to do with this administrative state? Because I think it is the greatest existential threat in the immediate to Americans' freedom, liberty, economic freedom, you name it. And unless we get somebody in as a powerful executive, because most of the administrative state resides inside the Article 2 executive branch, unless you get somebody in that rejects the premise, and this has been a problem. You mentioned Mitt Romney, George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush. They all accepted the premise that the administrative state was legitimate. Their only problem with it was that they weren't running it. And then Donald J. Trump shows up and goes, I reject the premise. This isn't legitimate. This isn't constitutional. I'm the one who decides. And for having the temerity to say that, he was considered a traitor to his country. So now we're in a situation where we've got to get this in front of the American people to help them understand the implications of November 5th are massive on a whole host of fronts, but this is one of them, the administrative state, and what will we do with it?
Well, question for you and Mark is, and part of my lead up was that despite all of the obstacles to Trump, that the message is getting through. He used Twitter to his advantage, I think, in 2016. The environment's changed. He doesn't use it as much. Conservatives have such faith in the free market that will solve things. It looked like that was sort of happening in the late 90s and early 2000s with Fox News. And I think Britt Hume was one who would say that he sort of had two assumptions. One is that they would be wildly successful, and that the other was that many people would follow them. And others didn't. Even ones that are so ABC and NBC are lost. That is, my history professor in college would say that part of the empire is lost to the barbarians, Christian, and we're never getting it back. CBS would be a logical one, actually, to go centrist. Anyway, long story short is, do you think that he is actually getting through, and is there any hope? Of course, you have conservative media properties, but I mentioned that ABC News lost 1 million viewers. I mean, can you believe they had 1 million viewers? There are like 7 million people who watch that program every night.
The Zoolander host. I think he is, partly because he's providing solutions. He does have quite a platform. People are covering, and people are realizing, we know that Kamala Harris will be a continuation, if not worse, of the status quo, which of course is horrible economic news. Inflation, the disaster on the southern border, immigration, which is meant to import new voters, and quite frankly, I think destroy the fabric of this country, because I truly believe this, Christian. Those that are adamantly opposed to representative democracy, who have tried to destroy the moral and political authority of the U.S. Constitution, I would argue for the last 100 years, which is what the progressives have tried to do, loathe the founders, loathe their founding documents and the government that comes out of those founding documents. They are trying to destroy the moral fabric of this country. I would argue, and I put this in the book, they look at us as being the ones who are disruptive. All we want is a restoration of what a republic is. We want the restoration of our rights, free speech, free flow of information, all these things that we are guaranteed that we should be having, that governments are meant to secure and take none of them away. So we're not really the revolutionaries. They are. They are the ones trying to destroy what we once had, and in its place raise up a new form of government, which is the administrative state. So has Trump broken through? I think so. I think that Kamala Harris, despite the fact that she is the nation's leading purveyor of word salads, has an inability to communicate what they're actually trying to do, but doesn't want to. I mean, Christian, do you really want her going into fine point detail on her Soviet-style price controls? Do you really want her talking about coercive socialism of the Green New Deal, which is what it is? So they're trying to do this kind of, hide the football sort of thing, while Donald Trump is out there going, I've got solutions. And they know he does, because he was in office for 4 years and was actually quite successful, even though he was under constant political attack for, I would say, even before he was sworn in, and certainly through all 4 years of him being in office.
Well, and Mark, sort of same question to you. I mean, there's a lot of money on the conservative side. Why isn't there more conservative media, more outlets for people like Trump?
Well, I think, quite frankly, it comes down to be perfectly honest with you, is it's years ago, Jim Broyhill, who was a senator from North Carolina, somebody asked him why we don't have better candidates. And he said, because we can get better jobs. And I remember asking him about, I can't remember her name right now. She was a Democratic congressperson. And he said, they said, what do you think what she's going to do after? He goes, she's never leaving Congress. It's the best job she's ever had. No, he goes, look at her. Do you think she couldn't manage a 7-Eleven? And I think it's one of the things that we really forget. And I think, quite frankly, sometimes we're not as decent about. One of the hopes that I have, again, I'm kind of out there with this, is like, I think a lot of what's happened in our world with, I call the productive class, with other people, is our lives have gotten a lot better in the last 25 years. Everything really has. Technology's made a massive choice. These little things we have in our pockets, the variety of food, the spread of logistics, you know what I'm saying, that's allowed things to come to us from every place. My point is, despite the administrative state, we've been able to outpace it. Now, I believe that was the case until the last maybe 10 years. And I think the rot's been catching up. In other words, I think everybody's life was getting better. Even under someone like Clinton, it was getting better and better. Under Bush, not a lot of damage done, but not good. And then it started getting worse. Ned brought up regulations. Quite frankly, I'm a business guy. I would rather, in Hong Kong, we used to have a saying with our low tax rate, we would rather take a percentage point increase in taxes than add another page to our 4-page income tax form because we just hated the regulation. But my belief is what's happening now, and I see it online, is people are starting to see that all these increases in their productivity and quality of life are slowing down drastically. And I think what I hope Trump and I hope other people connect to them is they're seeing this slowing. And in other words, I don't think they're going to have their heads in their phones all day long. You know, I got to tell you, my son he's in grad school, but a lot of his friends came out and these guys have good schools, good degrees. 5 years ago, before COVID, they all had, because we know the area, we all have friends. There were a lot of job offers. A lot of these guys are struggling for job offers. There's a few of them are coming, but they don't really have what they had. I sense it. I sense when you go on campuses now, you see, I don't think in 2016, there wouldn't be many Trump rallies because the guys would be a little bit scared and intimidated. You're seeing stuff on campus now that people are just like, I got to do it.
Can I say two things really quick, Christian, that Mark said that really spurred a few thoughts. One, we need to change our mindset and how we're approaching politics. Progressives, this is their religion, the administrative state, their golden calf. And they approach all of this as religious zealots. We are going to remake and reshape this country into an image of our own making. The problem with most people on the right is they're careerists. They want to show up in D.C., have a wonderful career. Didn't I have a great time? Yeah, I got to be a congressman or senator. And these you're never going to beat religious zealots with careerists. So we have to change our mindset and how we approach all of this. And then you're making this point. I think this is what is happening over the last decade. I make the comparison to the administrative state as a system dynamics in which reinforcing loops, they strengthen themselves, and it's like compounding interest where it starts slowly and over the course of time, like compounding interest, it all of a sudden just starts to explode. And I think that's what we're kind of seeing a little bit where over the course of the last 100 years, it's been building, building, building. And now all of the sudden, which isn't really all of a sudden, it's been building, we're seeing this massive growth where it's the regulations and this massive state are weighing the American people down on a whole host of fronts, whether it's personal freedom, whether it's economic freedom, you name it, because it's all starting to explode in size and weighing down the American people's chance for all of these freedoms and opportunities that we've had in the past that I think are in real danger right now.
Right. No, it does seem to have passed some tipping point. Your book actually does, you mentioned it's a lot of, it's sort of great for people who like history and great for people who like politics. And you start with Woodrow Wilson or Robert La Follette, or do you go back? What about Theodore Roosevelt? A lot of conservatives like him. Is he a good guy or a bad guy in your book?
He's a bad guy.
Yeah.
So I call them the four horsemen of the progressive apocalypse. And three of the four that I mentioned are Republicans, Woodrow Wilson being the exception. But he really is in many ways because he won the 1912 presidential election, was the one that really started the administrative state. But most of those, a lot of Republicans, sadly, back in the day, accepted the premise that it was legitimate, that they should have this because it was going to lead to greater progress, Christian. We should leave behind those old men and their, crazy old ideas of separation of powers and diffusion of power and natural inherent rights. They vehemently rejected a rights-based government, which, again, the Declaration kind of put out the premise of Creator gives us unalienable rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. That's the framework for the Constitution. Again, separation of powers. The diffusion of power, I want to make this point, the diffusion of power is the greatest protector of our natural rights, not an enumerated Bill of Rights. Many authoritarian states around the world have a wonderful Bill of Rights that might even be better than ours, which mean absolutely nothing because power's been consolidated and is authoritarian. But Theodore Roosevelt is very problematic for me because he became one of the leading evangelists for progressive statism, that the state was a living organism. It was salvation. Everything should be subsumed by individuals, corporations, individual rights. He believed that you did not have a right to property unless the state thought it deemed that was beneficial to the state. So he really became that leading evangelist for progressivism in the early 1900s. And I find him extremely problematic because he rejected wholesale the Constitution, the moral political authority of it, and again, the Republic. And it was even one of the commentators at the time said, Roosevelt doesn't believe in democracy. He just believes in more government.
Just realized that I'm outnumbered by Virginians, so there might be some Jefferson lovers on the line here. I'm not one of them. But what about Henry Wallace? Did you get? Do you have a few paragraphs to make fun of him? This would be FDR's second vice president.
I didn't. I made fun. I addressed the main four horsemen. I addressed the three massive sledgehammers to the Republic, the first wave of progressivism with Woodrow Wilson, FDR with his New Deal, LBJ with his Great Society. I talk about Frank Goodnow. Woodrow Wilson was really another leading evangelist for progressivism, but Frank Goodnow was the one that really made it a reality with his administrative law and putting flesh on the bones. The other one I talk about that I think is really problematic is a guy named John Burgess. He was a law professor at Columbia whose students included Theodore Roosevelt, who was deeply imbued with Georg Hegel's views of the state as the march of God on earth. The state decides what objective truth is, science, all of these things. The state is a living organism. Again, state is salvation. That's another important point that we should discuss, because that explains the perpetual growth of government. But John Burgess vehemently rejected a rights-based government, and he is considered the father of political science here in America. So I think we should probably re-examine the entire process and study of political science, because the guy that founded it had really nothing to do with the founders or their original intent of the Constitution or a republic.
Well, fast forward, a question for both of you, but then maybe you could start, since you've spoken, I think, or you've met with Trump. I don't know if you have on this topic specifically, but has he gotten religion? Will he erect a presidential personnel process? Because before you can really put a dent in those 3 million bureaucrats, you have to start with your own, the inner circle, and then thousands of political appointees. He's also talked about, I think, Schedule F. It's a great letter to choose for a way of taking some of these bureaucrats and saying, you're really in a policy-making job, and so maybe you should get into a different status. Do you think he can pull it off? Do you think they're ready?
So can I explain one thing really quick, and then I will address that question, Christian? People have asked, why does government continue to grow? It just continues to expand, and it grows and it grows and it grows. Well, it's built into the DNA of the administrative state, because progressives believe that the state is salvation. And if the state is salvation, why would you ever want to limit salvation? You don't. Salvation should be in all aspects of our lives until every aspect of our life is saved, and we reach the end of history and the perfectly rational state, and mankind reaches a higher plane of existence and is perfected. So when government continues to grow and grow, that was the point from day one. It's built into the DNA. That's why you actually have to slay Leviathan, kill the beast, because if you don't, government's going to continue to be perpetual. 36 trillion in debt that's how you get there, because the state, which is salvation, must be funded, and there is no end to it. It is perpetual. Now, back to Donald Trump. He did not get presidential personnel right in his first term for the first 3 years. Johnny DeStefano was a disaster. The fourth year with Johnny McEntee, Johnny knew exactly what was going on, knew that he had to have people appointed to the right positions who were on the same page with Trump, realized the dangers of the administrative state. So I would say, and I write this in the book, Trump has to get transition personnel right. He has to get PPO right day one with somebody that's on the same page, who's going to be making those plum book appointments correctly. And you and I both know this, Christian. I haven't been in D.C. for a while. There's thousands, really about 400 or 500 are key ones that are going to be important decision makers, have to be on the same page with Trump, have to be sent into the various departments and agencies, understanding it will be war every day. They will resist, they will fight, and have to be on the same page with Trump that the administrative state is not legitimate, and on the same page with him devolving and breaking apart the administrative state. So I lay out in the last chapter, you mentioned Schedule F. I talk about reduction of force exercises. I talk about dealing with OPM. I talk about NSC. NSC is not under presidential personnel, which is how you get Chowdhury Vindman into NSC, and then basically performing a soft coup, trying to perform a soft coup against the duly elected president of the United States. So there's a lot of reform items. the thing that he's got to get right, obviously, is PPO with a commitment as the head of the executive branch where the administrative state resides. I am going to go to war with the administrative state and break the state. And I say that because he keeps on talking. I've told him this. You talk about draining the swamp. Well, the foundation of the swamp is the state. You have to break the state before you can drain the swamp. If you break the state, you will drain the swamp, and then you can restore the republic. And I also told him this. You've got to get the presidential personnel right and understand that everything they're going to throw against you, which this was 2 years ago. We were sitting in Bedminster having this conversation. The lawfare was already begun. Holy cow, it went on steroids after that. But it's all about who decides, sir. They're going to throw stuff against you that is going to be insane, but it's really because they know you are an existential threat to the administrative state status quo because you reject the premise, because you think you decide, they think they decide. That's what this is all about.
All right. Well, and also try and shoot you on the ninth hole. Mark, as you sort of open the aperture a little bit, separate from the issue of whether Trump has figured it out, are there enough Republicans? Do you think the movement?
I think there's two things. Enough? I mean, one of the things that Ned has been hitting on, and I've actually heard you talk about this before, Ned, is I think when I look at what has to happen, I won't tell the story now, but I had an experience courtesy of Steve Bannon and some other guys with presidential personnel where I sat around in a cafeteria for 2 days, never called into a room, with like 4 or 5 other guys, all $500,000 a year plus guys who said, "I'll serve this president." And then we never got called in, and nothing ever happened. And there were people trying to, I thought I was going to get a job. I remember my wife was that we were so happy I didn't, couldn't afford it. Time with the kids. But the thing is like, I only have 2 prescriptions here. In fact, I was so disturbed by it. I actually wrote Jack Keane because I knew General Keane. I was so because I was a businessman. We were sitting there going like, this is not how you do stuff. You don't have 25-year-olds in here coming talking to. Not that our egos are big, just, you don't have them coming by and blowing people off. Not us, just other people we were watching. But my point is this. I think Trump has to get a couple of things straight. First of all, I think he needs to get what we would call he needs some guys who are willing to die on the stake. In other words, you got to have people who are going to go in there and say, you know what, I'm going to come in here in 2 years, I'm going to be driven out of here. And I know it. In other words, there'll be 3 or 4 congressional hearings because I'm doing something. He's got to get those guys. And I think they exist. I'm very sure they exist. The problem is you get people, like I said, the Romney guys who are coming in and they're careerists. They came in, oh, my God, I want to stay here forever. I want to bounce over to this place. And they never leave. Yes. And the second thing I think that is kind of independent of that is, there's an old saying that, if they're not there, they're not a problem. One of the things is that I think he is going to fire people, and I think he has to do it. He's got 4 years. I think he'll probably have a Supreme Court that would back him up. I think they need to be absolutely brutal. I hate to use the word Elon Musk, but Elon, nothing happens if you let a lot of people go. In other words, just do it. And then see what happens, and that'll be it.
No, I even write about some of this in which I would encourage the head of the executive branch, the president, to visit the various departments and agencies to deal with the bureaucrats that will be stalling. It's one of their favorite tactics. Oh, I'll deal with that later. Oh, I missed that email. Oh, I'll get back to that in a few weeks or a few months. Calls in those bureaucrats in front of the head of the department, the agency, whatever it is, on the carpet and said, why are you delaying? And you will do this immediately. You'll do it right now. And if they refuse, fire them on the spot. And if there is then pushback, let's go all the way to the Supreme Court and have that conversation. Because you're right, the Supreme Court has decided, you can see it this summer, they've decided with the Chevron deference and the SEC tribunals, we kind of had enough of this administrative state approach. We believe it is unconstitutional. Multiple decisions this summer demonstrating that. I think I'd love to have that fight with this Supreme Court with a powerful executive saying, I'm going to fire you. Let's go. Yeah. Let's have this conversation.
I think the other thing, too, is, and this is the businessman in me, when you fire somebody, I worked for a guy who took over back in the 70s. He took over the Guam. Yep. They had the Guam Port Authority. And that was the days we were transitioning from ships with the King Kong nets to the modern containers. So you needed less people. You just needed less people. And what he said was, look, just pay them out. I mean, I'm not saying we pay out all these people, but
that's one of the reform items.
Yeah, just
you can do voluntary separations. Yes.
Yeah, just pay them out. Quite frankly, what will happen is usually the best and the brightest will actually take it and go try to do something else, which is fine with me because, look, I have the very Hong Kong attitude. I don't mind having stupid people in government. I just don't want too many of them. You know what I'm saying? In other words, stupid and lazy in government is not the worst thing in the world to have. But I do think of that, but I will say I really worry with the Harris administration. I just see the people that come in with these left-wing administrations, and I see it, frankly, more closely in my world, not so much on the federal level, but on the state level. And you see who they come in, and they are not the brightest, they are not the best, but they have immense power. And all of a sudden,
very dictatorial.
You're sitting across from somebody who you wouldn't give a job as your office administrator, and they're telling you, oh, we need you to do this in your construction project. We need you to do that, basically because they can tell you, and then you end up in fighting and all that stuff. So I think Ned's spot on. I think if Trump could do that, if he can do what we're talking about, I think everything else works just fine, to be perfectly honest with you.
It's amazing in my mind what a powerful executive who rejects the premise can do in 4 years, even if Congress proves itself, as per usual, to be feckless, gutless, spineless wonders. The executive orders that he can do and the various steps he can take over the course of 4 years with a Supreme Court that's on the same page with him, with the American people backing him up, because, again, they've been hopefully illuminated and had clarity and have kind of gotten to the point where we reject the premise as well. You can make immense strides. And I have to tell you this, though, there's a couple things. He has 4 years. What do you think he did by having a 39-year-old vice presidential nominee? He went all in on this.
Yeah,
right? This is not about there are a lot of people, the establishment Republicans, everybody, we're just going to have to outlast him for another 4 years. We'll be fine. And he was like, oh, really? Chip's all in. I'm all in. I have a 39-year-old VP who hopefully will be set up to have another 8 years. Because I keep on saying to people, 4 years is a great start. You need to have power for 12 years in a White House committed to this, with hopefully Congress at some point waking up and going, you know what, maybe we should stop sub-delegating our legislative authority to the Article 2 unelected bureaucrats. And all at the same time, how about we just starve the beast? How about we just say, you know what, power the purse in the House. We're not going to do that until we actually get some real accountability. And the last thing I'll say on this that I think needs to be made, some people are going to push back and go, we're in a very complex age, Ned. We're in the 21st century. There's a lot of things that we're dealing with. We need these technical experts. Okay, fine, fair enough. No, fair enough. They're in the Article 2 branch. They're unelected. Shift them back into the Article 1 branch as being part of the permanent congressional staff where they would be accountable to the duly elected representatives of the people. Shrink that considerably. We don't need this massive amount of these, technical educated elite, which I would call some of them are credentialed idiots. But you put them under the Article 1 branch into the permanent committee staff, and then you have some sort of accountability to the duly elected representatives who are supposed to be doing the legislating in the Article 1 branch, not this Article 2 unconstitutional, unelected bureaucrats doing the legislating. Enough of that. Nothing to do with the Constitution. Quite frankly, nothing to do with our American tradition of government.
When you talk about the expertise, I have a
credentialed idiocracy.
I know. Last week I was in D.C. Kristen saw me in D.C. and I talked to a friend. I didn't get a chance to see him, but he was in town from San Francisco, and he was part of a group that was talking to people about AI. And he goes, what are you doing? I go, I'm up on Capitol Hill talking to people about AI and potential legislation. I go, what it's like? He goes, it's like lecturing monkeys. In other words, I do tech investments sometimes. I sit in the room and I just make sure somebody 30 years younger and smart sitting next to me to tell us what to do. When they say they need these experts and everything like that, every time you look at them, you just see it. And it's one of the reasons I'm convinced they hate Musk so much, not just because of all the other stuff, but literally here's a guy with that budget compared to what he's done. And you look at NASA, and it's not just NASA, it's the Air Force, it's the National Reconnaissance Office. And
there's no accountability. We just keep funding this stuff.
And Musk has got he's got ships flipping in the air. I'm so stupid. I was watching that and I go, oh my God, it's going to crash. And that was actually that planned maneuver where they flip the thing as it's going down. I'm going like, that's where I'm going, thank God I'm getting ready to retire because I don't want to compete with those people.
Well, but part of the problem is when you don't have any accountability because they've insulated themselves and it makes it very hard for them to be fired. Again, I put out some of this stuff and how we can reform that. You get this credentialed idiocracy. If you had a process by which you could fire some of these folks in mass, you could actually demand better quality of technical experts and actually bring in the best and the brightest to be part of the Article 1 legislative branch and part of the permanent committee, congressional committees. But right now, some of the things they've done, they've not only set it up to be separated out from political accountability, they've insulated themselves even more to make it even harder to fire them. And that, again, leads to just total mediocrity.
Kristen,
vicious mediocrity.
Can I jump in and ask, I want to ask Ned a question. But it's not on the national level, it's on the state level. When you go to Virginia or you go to some places, like I'll just give you an example. A Virginia DMV is not the worst experience in the world, but I was down in Florida at the DMV and it was actually okay. However, if you try to go to the DMV in New Jersey, it's a nightmare. What effects are these governors having in these different states? Are we going to see? Everybody's leaving New Jersey and New York, but are we going to see that is that going to help the country, or what do you? I mean, you know what I'm getting at? What breakout?
If they actually have the political courage to do it and reject the premise, because this is not. I mean, I talk about American Leviathan. I focus primarily on the federal government, and that Leviathan. It's fed into the various states where there's obviously this massive bureaucracy that I think is weighing down the various states. And then you see, aggressive governors saying, we're not going to do this anymore, conservative governors. So I think you just need we need more people that have the political courage to say, I'm not going to do this anymore. We're going to reduce the size of government. We're going to reduce the regulatory state. We're not going to have all these unelected bureaucrats being the one making the decisions. So it could be a feeding down. If Trump shows, I think courageous is it's infectious. And courage leads to more courage. If Donald Trump can start to do this at the federal level, I think you're going to see more of these governors hopefully stepping up to the plate going, yeah, that's a great move at the federal level. We should be doing this at the state level because the American people actually need a government of, by, and for the people. I mean, that's the basic premise of a republic, right? All power flows from the people to their duly elected representatives, who they make the stewards of the power and money given to them, to actually create a government that actually benefits the American people first and last in all things. And I think if Trump can do that at the federal level, I think you start to see some of these governors doing the same thing at the state level.
Yeah, I hope so, because I think one of the things I do like about Glenn Youngkin in Virginia is when he talks. And it's very interesting because I live in New Jersey. And in Virginia, we have a private equity guy in Youngkin who basically is trying to put this through. In New Jersey, we have a Goldman Sachs guy. Murphy's a Goldman Sachs guy.
Right.
Goldman Sachs guy was in Hong Kong. Spent a lot of time in Hong Kong. Talks about how much he likes Hong Kong. He's expanded the administrative state here.
Right.
And to me, what it is I know this man knows better. In other words, I know Murphy's been sitting at Goldman Sachs, and of course they have their own politics. But internally, as an institution, Goldman Sachs is a pretty efficient place. You know what I'm saying? Not much dead weight sitting around there. But he comes here.
Yeah, no, it's easy. I think it's, so my dad was in the House for 10 years.
Yeah.
And I just remember really interesting conversations with him about this system that's in place in DC seeks to conform you to its image. And unless you have some really strong principles and have the courage to say, I'm not going to go along or reject the premise, it does conform you to its image eventually. And over the course of time, you become a reflection of that system. And I think you see some of that because it's a much easier path to go down. I'll be honest.
Ned,
I think that's why you see a lot of Republican congressmen just going, it's probably not the right thing to do, but it's much easier. And besides, I'm an expert in self-preservation. If I really fight this too hard, I might not be able to come back in 2 years. So I'm just going to go along with it for now and just continue to fund the state blindly.
I'm going to give you a compliment. I hope you take it the right way. You know who said the exact same thing that you're saying? And I know you're as a DC guy. Jack can't cook. I had, for some bizarre reason, a relationship through there. And Jack Kent Cook said one time in the group that I was standing around, and he said, look, I'm rich. I'm loaded.
Yeah.
There's nothing they can do to me. You know what I'm saying? And he said,
Right.
but all you other guys, you got to bend. You got to do your things. I still remember that. It's the other reason too, when you talk about Republicans, and us. I mean, I always look back at Joe the plumber, and I always say, here's Joe the plumber. He's in a career. What really struck me about that is Obama couldn't touch him. It's the same thing with these comedians. One of the reasons why I think comedians are becoming the modern, really public speakers in politics, they're really hard to hit financially. In other words, a comedian can go out, fill a club, unless they're literally knocking on the door with the German-style helmets, knocking that door down. That guy's going to sell. He's going to sell 1,000 tickets at $25 each. He's going to make $1 million a year just doing his thing. So what I'm really encouraged by is that, you're there. I know it's tough what you're doing, but I really appreciate it and approve it. Approve of it in many ways. I think more people have to learn that, because I think your message to me is, I tell people all the time, I really worry, like you say, that the regulatory state, my kids are in there. I got 123, 120, 120, 120. Kristen's got the little ones. I don't know what your kids are, but I mean, the thing is that I worry that they're going to walk into a world that basically, that the regulatory state has taken over, that, they're looking at jobs. My kids are already sensing that there are certain jobs off limits for them. I had a talk with a young woman the other day. She's in her early 20s. She was applying for a major journalism job. She is Asian American, basically born in the States. She told me she could literally feel not being, that they're not interested in her at these major, she has the dream. I want to work at the New York Times. I want to work at all these other, they're just not interested in her.
Never going to happen.
Not interested in her. It's not going to happen. And I think she's going to end up in law school. But, she's been trying for a while. She's very bright. She was even going to take, I said, look, go be a crime reporter. I said, literally, go to the new, and then get your credentials and go up. And she said, it's just so hard. But her first experience was through an internship program, and she's in there, and she looked over, and people from her school, good school, they weren't getting in, but certain people were. And I think that's the way of the future if we don't watch out.
Yeah. No, I mean, well, first of all, again, I don't call them media. I call them corporate propagandists. They're not meant to be about the truth or facts or anything. They're meant to amplify the approved narrative. I'm starting to think, and this might sound harsh, but I'm just going to say it anyway. You can't be an intelligent free thinker and be in the corporate propagandist ranks, because you might start to ask questions about, that doesn't sound like the truth. Is that really what's taking place? You have to actually do whatever you're being told to do to actually report, to amplify the approved narrative. You can't be intelligent. You can't actually be a free thinker to be part of these corporate propagandist ranks. That's why, I mean, Trump has to win. I was thinking.
I'm actually thinking. My one of the big reasons I'm starting to think is, like, the thing that really kind of surprises me is because of my business. I mean, I'm seeing Hispanic I would say middle class Hispanic guys, really first generation. Businessmen, small businessmen. I talked to some of them. They're Trump, and I'm not sensing. My point is, I'm not sensing much enthusiasm for her at all.
But even more so, I mean, one of the things, besides I write books and do some commentary, that's not what pays the bills. I do American Majority, the C3, and then American Majority Action. And what we're doing right now, I think there's some fundamentals that have changed considerably since 2020 for Trump that simply weren't there. First of all, a commitment to actually doing absentee ballot chase and early voting push, generating more ballots among mid to low propensity voters. And I do think you're seeing a shift in some of these demographics as they have watched this disaster of 4 years. So I think there's a lot of different things that I'm seeing as we're involved in these efforts in Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, North Carolina. the numbers are really good for Trump on a fundamental level. I love a good poll number because I'm a political nerd. They're kind of like weather forecasts. They might or might not be true a week or two from now. But the fundamental numbers, I think, is what people should be looking at, is how big are the ballot universes in a given state, and what is the partisan registration advantage? And then also, has there been a diminishment in some of these demographics that have been typically for the other side? And I think you're seeing all of that across the board in the 7 key states that I think are going to decide this White House. So I'm quietly optimistic that we'll have a chance. I'm a believer that politics is policy. So this kind of tying into my whole administrative state reform, all of that. You have to actually win politically to have policy reform, to have governmental reform. But unless you win politically, all you're doing is having great conversations. I think he's got a legitimate shot. Trump does right now. What are we, 6 weeks out, to actually be in the right place to implement these reforms. But I'm not letting up. I mean, people are crowing over the Quinnipiac poll. I think it's about a 13-point difference between where Biden was and Harris is today. And I'm like, that's great. Do not let up for a second, because we do not have, losing is not an option for the future of this country.
I really, my thing is that I'm seeing, you're like, what really struck me was in 2020. Of course, there was COVID going on a little bit. You know what I'm saying? COVID was there.
Right.
But in 2020, my son told me at Purdue, he and a friend were the only two that were going to say, we're for Trump. You know what I'm saying? And he said He wasn't even there. I was at Purdue recently, and there was like a college Republican meeting, and they were packed. And, and I think that's coming up. But I think the real reason is, as you say, I'm very encouraged to see things going on in Arizona and things in Nevada. Really,
so just to give people perspective, last I checked, Republicans are up about 75,000 ballots on the permanent absentee ballot list in Arizona over Democrats, which is a very encouraging sign, and almost 300,000 more registered Republicans than Democrats in Arizona. These are the fundamental numbers I'm talking about that I think should give us, the numbers are there. Can we take advantage of them? That's why I put in ballot generation, ballot chase teams to not only chase the ballots, but then when early voting starts in Arizona, ballots drop and early voting starts on October 9th. If you don't have a ballot, go vote early in person on day one. Save Trump money, save me money, and let's get the vote. And if Trump can be in the lead or close to the lead on AB, EV, you start a narrative, because Republicans traditionally win definitively on election day. But if he's closer in the lead on AB, EV, you begin a narrative in which people start to realize, oh my gosh, he can actually win. And it becomes this psychological advantage as well of people going, he's on his way to winning, and then on election day, seal the deal. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that to me that's one of the dynamics that I think is very different this time around than 2020. I do not think, after the 2022 midterms, I had an epiphany. Sadly, it was a couple days afterwards. I wish I'd had it before. Nobody was doing this in a concerted way like the Florida GOP. They weren't doing AB generation. They weren't doing AB chase. They weren't doing early voting in these key states. We better figure this out for 2024. So that's a dynamic that is very different for us now than it was in 2020. And the other thing, too, I mean, think about all the censorship that took place in 2020 because Elon Musk didn't have Twitter, now X. They cannot control the narrative like they did in 2020, whether it was the Hunter Biden laptop that you mentioned, Christian, or, the 51, intelligence officials that say it's Russian disinformation. Elon Musk owning X coming into 2024 is, I think, a major dynamic that not enough people have discussed in regards to controlling the narrative on the elections, on Trump, on what's actually taking place. So there's a lot of different dynamics that I think are very different this time around that I don't think people have really thought through. They've been focused on the polls, but the fundamentals are completely different.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that optimistic note, we are out of time. But thank you, Ned Ryun, author of American Leviathan, The Birth of the Administrative State and Progressive Authoritarianism. That's available on Amazon or other outlets by Ned Ryun. Ned, your last name is Ryun, right? So people are searching for that.
Spelled funny, but pronounced Ryan.
And CEO of American Majority. Thanks for joining us. And thank you, Mark Simon. We'll be back with another episode soon.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.